Malcolm Jenkins, I don't want to say broke news on our show, but he did say, and we'll bring John McMullen in and get his take on some of the stuff that Malcolm Jenkins told us here exclusively on the Sports Bash, John, which was, and you may have known this, but he did come out and say he was disappointed that the Eagles did not approach him this year and that he wants to be here, but business is business. And a lot of people we've been talking to here about it have said they think this thing is going to kind of go down an ugly road. So, number one, the news that he said he was disappointed that the Eagles did not approach him in season.
Yeah, Malcolm kind of admitted that after the season on cleanout day, essentially said he would not be back under his current deal because, remember, he's still under contract technically for another year, but it was well known dating back to last offseason when you had him missing voluntary work, which is by definition voluntary, but still that's not the way Malcolm does things. He doesn't miss practices, so it was a clear indication from that point that he wanted a tweak to his contract. He has said he has outperformed his contract, which he certainly has if you compare his salary to others around the league. Problem is, and these things get sticky, a lot of the things that make Malcolm Jenkins so valuable, and this is sort of the dichotomy you have in the NFL. And when you play as much as he does, never misses a down, never misses a practice, plays on special teams, teams look at it and say, hey, thanks, but we also know once you hit the age of 30, and Malcolm has passed that already, obviously, the decline starts, and the more you play, the quicker that decline comes. So it's tough, and I've said it from the start. This is going to be one of the toughest decisions the Eagles have to make because that is their most valuable defender. I often say Fletcher Cox is the Eagles' best defensive player, but Malcolm Jenkins is their most valuable because he does so much. Played 7 different positions. Jim Schwartz will tell you he's so versatile, but he's aging. And he is a big-ticket item who has played a lot of football. And we talked about sentimentality a lot. Howie Roseman admitted he gets attached to his players. And sentimentality has hurt many, many teams in this league. And so the Eagles need Malcolm Jenkins back. But he's also at the age where you expect the decline to come. You can argue it already has started because he wasn't quite as good this season as he has been in the past. So what do you do if you're the Philadelphia Eagles? Do you just pay the money because of what he's done in the past? Or do you ignore sentimentality, go in a different direction and say, thanks for everything you've done, but we got to get younger? Something Howie Roseman also admitted.
How much, John? It was we had this debate, right? Obviously, when Malcolm got off, which it's you've earned this. Yes, he's earned it, but he also said business is business. How much premium do you pay for leadership?
And that's part of it. That's part of the mix, and that's what makes it such a difficult decision because the Eagles have to remake their secondary. You could argue they need 2 new corners, 2 new safeties, but the reality is that's too much movement for one off season in the NFL. You would imagine Rodney McLeod is not going to be back. So are you going to be able to get 2 starting level safeties in free agency and the draft? Are you going to be able to get cornerbacks as well? It's very, very unlikely. So what is that steadying presence, not only in the locker room, but also on the field, on the lineup? If you look at all 4 of those starters, Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby, and Rodney McLeod, Malcolm Jenkins, well, who's the one you feel most comfortable with from a leadership standpoint, from an understanding that he's probably going to be able to settle things down? It's pretty clearly Malcolm Jenkins, but do you want to pay him at like a top 5 safety in this league at his age? Well, when Anthony Harris, for instance, is a projected to be a free agent, and you play a ton of single high, and that might be the best pure coverage safety in the NFL. Well, he doesn't have a history here, but he's a young ascending player instead of an older descending player.
He also mentioned Corey Unlin leaving, and he said that, in that mode, it sounded like he was disappointed that Corey Unlin was going, and he mentioned that in the same breath that he talked about all the other guys that are not under contract in the secondary that you just listed, John. So what role did Corey Unlin play in all this as well, and how important, you're talking about finding consistency somewhere and replacing all of that in one offseason. That also there is there that you've got to replace that defensive backs coach.
Yeah, and the Eagles are going to bring in Marquand Manuel to be the new defensive backs coach. Remember, Tim Houck is the safeties coach. He's still here. And Corey didn't get fired. He got a better job as a defensive coordinator in Detroit, so that's a promotion for him. And that's one of those things. Look, I don't think, and I've said it before when Corey left, I don't think the Eagles were tackling him to keep him in the building. I don't think they were that concerned about losing him, to be honest. But Malcolm and him obviously have a very good relationship. But as I said, Tim Houck, who's actually the safeties coach, will still be here. I think that's not going to factor into it. I mean, it's pretty clear Malcolm is disappointed. The Eagles, let's be honest, the Eagles took advantage of his professionalism, and they did. And, but teams do that in the NFL. It's not like it's rare. You have certain guys who are professionals who aren't going to miss games. They aren't going to make business decisions. They are going to go out there and bust their you-know-what. And there are certain guys that won't do that. And the Eagles know who Malcolm Jenkins is, know he's going to be a leader, know he's going to be at every practice, know he's going to volunteer to be on special teams and go above and beyond. And they took advantage of that.
So, obviously, do you feel, John, that this is going down an ugly, bumpy road?
I don't know. I've always felt like the Eagles will pay him, will get him in. And by the way, I don't know if that's the right decision from a football standpoint. In fact, I think it's the wrong decision. But I ultimately think they will go down the road of sentimentality. That's been their history. I just mentioned, I don't think you can have that kind of drastic change. Look, it's pretty clear Rodney McLeod's not going to be back. Ronald Darby's not going to be back. And Jalen Mills is the one guy that they probably like to have back, but now Corey Unlin is in Detroit. Who knows what the market is going to be for him in a position where there is a significant dearth around the NFL. Everybody's looking for corners. So he might get a better deal than people realize. But I don't think you can have just that drastic of turnover, even though we talked about how poor the secondary was at times over this past season. A lot of that had to do with injuries. They need their constant, and Malcolm is obviously the constant back there. So ultimately, I think they'll work something out.
John McMullen, Football at 4, 97.3 ESPN Live at Radio Row. John, he also mentioned that he felt that everyone got spoiled. And I interjected, you mean the players or the fans? And he said everybody. Players, coaches, fans, media, we all got spoiled by winning the Super Bowl. Because I said, did he feel that the Super Bowl has lingered over them? And he said, no, not really. I think we just got spoiled. How do you take that? Like, how do you read him saying that? Because I was a little – I thought it was interesting the way he answered that. He felt that everyone got spoiled.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned that on this show numerous times. I certainly think the fan base got spoiled. I don't know if the coaching staff got spoiled. I don't know. I certainly don't think Malcolm himself got spoiled. He was the guy who said take down the Super Bowl championship logo in the locker room the off season after they won. He wanted to move on. So he was one of the guys preaching that. But certainly overall, I mean, that's something. I don't know if you mentioned the name Orlando Scandrick. I hope you did.
We did mention it.
He said.
We asked him about that and how he felt that. I mean, was it a factor? Was that somebody that made it an eye-opening thing for him as a leader? Like, wait a second, is this the way? Is this, he definitely went into the Scandrick stuff and felt that as the leader, and when it came up, talking to people, that the people in the locker room felt that Scandrick was incorrect. Essentially, right? I mean, am I wrong about that?
No, yeah, it's exactly what he said.
Well, I certainly think there are things that Orlando said that are incorrect, starting with the leadership of Malcolm Jenkins. And, the Eagles did that whole thing. And you'll see it on Amazon, All or Nothing. They go into that pretty deeply. I got an advanced screening copy. And
I was going to say, that's not out yet, right?
No, it comes out February 7th. But
okay.
they go over that issue, and they show the Scandrick comments, and they show them on the field in Minnesota. Everybody saw the Eagles tweet that out, where he talked about Malcolm playing to the end of the game when he forced that fumble in a blowout, and said what a leader he was. And then he was on FS1, and he said the exact opposite. That part I don't think is legitimate. But he also said, and it got lost, a lot of people in that locker room are living off the Super Bowl championship. I don't necessarily think that was incorrect. I do think, I mean, people have gotten spoiled by the championship. I think it's more of a fan base thing. Like, I think the Eagles overachieved. I've talked about that a lot this offseason. When you talk about the injuries and the personnel deficiencies, we overrated this team. And I'm in that category as well. If you go back to the summer, we all overrated this team. And once you recalibrate...
He made a reference to that, John. He did make a reference to that, too, that they weren't as good as they thought they were. And some of that he did... I mean, guys, he went to the laundry list of injuries. I mean... he knew them all. And I said, well, 2017, you were a victim of it. He said, not as bad. But I told him, I said, the fans thought in 2017 you had so many injuries so that you should be able to overcome them. And he just started rattling off 70% of the offense lost. So he was pretty cognizant of what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, injuries are a big part of it. And, one specifically, I think this entire season goes in a different direction if Deshaun Jackson is out there. I really believe that. And he essentially only played one game, and he went nuts in that game and tried to come back. It didn't work. Probably should have had the core muscle surgery early, and who knows what would have happened late in the season if he was able to come back. But again, you talk about how this team was built and the fact that that's a 33-year-old guy who's got a history of injuries, and the assumption that he was going to be there each and every week was probably a bad one. But you did hope, hey, if you kind of understood maybe he'd miss 2, 3, even 4 games, and he could kind of cobble through that. The fact that he missed everything in their offense was predicated on him forcing defenses to play a lot of cover 2, to put a safety over the top and open things underneath. Once they lost them, they didn't have that, and it became so difficult to move the football. Even late in the season when they had success, it was these 13, 14, 15-play grinded-out drives. There was no big playability other than the occasional Miles Sanders getting out in open space, but that's not something you can count on in this league. Hopefully the Eagles learn from that. They have a better plan going into next season, but there's no question the injuries play a part, but they play a part with every team and how you deal with it. And we saw that during the Super Bowl run. The difference was all those injuries, it was one guy here. It was a left tackle. And they were all over. It wasn't multiple receivers. It wasn't multiple cornerbacks. And that's kind of where it hurts when you have multiple injuries at the same position.
Mac Hollins was on with us a little while ago, and he mentioned that he felt the Eagles would be here if Jackson did not get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is amazing to say, typically when you think about somebody having that kind of swing, it's a quarterback, and which could
I think it was all the
obviously-
receivers, not just DJX.
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeffrey and Jackson, were the two specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know so much Alshon. I do think it was Sean. I do think this is a much better team if he plays 16 games. Again, that was probably unrealistic, but even if he played 12, 13 games, I think it's a completely different offense, a completely different team. And it's weird to say that about a speed receiver. You know, it generally, they don't have that kind of impact on an offense. On this particular team, the way the Eagles were built, they didn't have speed outside of Sean Jackson. The one guy who did have significant speed is Nelson Aguilar. He can't catch the football, so it made it very difficult. And we say it all the time. It's great, and there's nothing wrong. You can win a lot of different ways in the NFL. I'm proof positive of the two teams that are going to play on Sunday. But it's hard when you got to go 13 plays, 14 plays. You could get a false start that sets you back, a holding penalty. We all know how many mistakes, just a strip of the football, a turnover. It's hard to do that consistently. And when they lost that big playability, the offense just wasn't the same.
John, the reports are out that the Eagles interviewed Press Taylor for offensive coordinator. Does that feel like a smokescreen to you, or do you really think that he could be the guy?
No, I think he could be the guy, but if he is the guy, the Eagles are settling. They didn't get the guy they wanted. That's pretty clear. If they wanted to hire Press Taylor, if they wanted to hire Deuce Staley, if they wanted to hire even a Jim Caldwell, they would have already done it. They're clearly waiting for a coach in this game. It's not Mike Kafka, obviously, because the Chiefs are not going to let him go. So you look at the other side, and you start with Mike McDaniel. But there's also lesser-known coaches, quarterback coaches of both teams. They could be in the mix. Clearly, the Eagles have their eye on somebody in this game. Otherwise, they would have pulled the trigger. So if you get to next week and they're going to announce the entire coaching staff at the same time and Press Taylor is elevated, the Eagles will spin it the best they can, but everybody will know that was plan B, plan C, maybe even plan D. But, you know, if you look at the head coach of this team, that's not necessarily proof positive it's going to fail because sometimes you earmark something and you get lucky. And that's what happened when the Eagles missed out on Adam Gase and Ben McAdoo, and they got Doug Peterson.
What's your sense on Deuce Staley? I mean, a lot of people assume that he's frustrated because he keeps getting passed over for offensive coordinator, but you know, he is the assistant head coach, and he's certainly done a lot and done a great job with Miles Sanders this year. What's your sense on Deuce Staley and where he might be at? Obviously, he's not going to leave and go somewhere else. There aren't really any jobs open at this point. But is he getting disgruntled, or do you think he's just fine?
No, I think he's got to be a little bit upset, especially if Press gets the job. I think if somebody from outside the organization, because that's been one of the narratives behind the scenes, that Jeffrey Lurie wants a new voice and new ideas, outside eyes, so to speak. And then if they're not able to do that and they simply elevate Press Taylor, then I think Deuce probably has an issue being passed over for the second consecutive time and technically being jumped over. If you think about Mike Groh as the receivers coach and now you have Press as the quarterback's coach, essentially jumping over him. Understand it from Doug Peterson's standpoint. He wants a coordinator that has more experience with the passing game and the quarterback position, and that's the conventional thinking in the NFL. But if you're Deuce Staley, that's not going to calm you down. So I do ultimately think that you're right. The timing, it's not going to help him right now, but I think it's pretty clear that he will start looking outside the organization because he's a guy with aspirations to be a head coach in this league, and he's not going to be able to take that next step here. And if you can't take it here, you got to look elsewhere.
Johnny Mac, Football at 4, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Sports Bash coverage of the big game this hour is brought to you by Wild Wild West at Bally's Atlantic City. Catch all the action on the largest screens on the East Coast inside AC's largest sports book. Enjoy live music, tailgate bites, self-serve beer, and more. It's all going down at Atlantic City's Wild Wild West Casino. And, of course, John, Football at 4 every day. We got to get your breakdown, thoughts, and where this game is going to go on Sunday. You'll hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN. It's the Chiefs, and it's the 49ers. It's a 1.5-point spread. Kevin Harlan was on with us earlier. He said it's one of the very few Super Bowls where the spread is with under 2 points. So is it as close as Vegas is making it out to be?
I don't think so. I've talked about it a little bit. I do think it's going to be very difficult for San Francisco. Not that they can't win the game. I think they have to play essentially a perfect game. They have to get the lead early. They have to play with the lead. As I mentioned, if they get down by 2 scores, game's probably over because of the offensive firepower of the Chiefs. I think it's going to be difficult for San Francisco. And we know the formula, and nobody runs it better than them. They have a great defense, especially up front. But they also have been gassed in the passing game at times this season. And, look, I mean, Kansas City puts so much pressure on you with the speed on that offense and obviously Patrick Mahomes' ability to get the football down the field, ability to extend plays. I just think it's his time. Patrick Mahomes, I think this is going to be number one of a few Super Bowls for that particular quarterback, and I think Kansas City wins the game 31-23.
31-23 is the pick. Johnny Mack, and of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. We'll have full coverage, and it begins at 5 o'clock on Sunday on 97.3 ESPN. John, it's a pleasure, man. We missed you down here this year. You didn't miss much. There was no food.
Well, that's the most important part. Is Scott going to the game? Enjoy the game.
No, we are leaving in a few hours here. Our flight is at 8 o'clock, so we're cutting it close. Jetting out of here at 6, right to the airport. And Scott did get us a police escort, though.
Yeah. You drive fast enough, they'll be, you know.
We'll be in the back of the police car.
There's no driving fast in this town. We've learned that.
No.
Oh, boy.
Barely any driving.
John is back Monday recapping this. And, by the way, we had a lot of Eagles news. I mean, making news with Malcolm Jenkins live here on the Sports Bash set, former Eagle Mac Hollins, who, by the way, also admitted that the changing of the wide receiver coaches was something that kind of affected his, development a little bit. And he did say that Mike Groh.
No one wants to hear that.
He did say that Mike Groh and Frank Reich both had a hand in the offense. I don't know how much, but we'll have that. All right, John, thanks, pal.
All right, thank you, guys. Appreciate it.